This message is brought to you by Fungi Nail. For all your curled, gnarled, Swiss roll-like, crusty, concave, smelly toes that seem to turn into eagle talons. Apply this liberally and maybe something will happen. Not responsible for your liver falling out your toes. Please consult for physician if your ears start to bleed.
Oh, that was so good. Today we're laying in the comfort of our bed once more, and we are going to be discussing vagabond life. As he and I have lived in precisely the same amount of places, we've also visited almost every state in this country. I'm 5 states short of
Minus Alaska and Hawaii.
Yes, that's 2 of my 5. And there are a couple out in the West that I haven't been to. We've already discussed that, but we really don't have enough time to cover all the places that we've visited for 1 to 5 days a pop. So instead, we're going to remain exclusively on where
we have resided.
Take it away.
Well, I would say let's begin with our youth. And I hearken from the Midwest. And I did get to travel a lot as a child, mostly on family vacations. I spent summers in Minnesota, which was always an amazing time, and I still reflect upon it fondly. It's a little slice of heaven on earth, very serene, very calm, very relaxing, and to this day, I still think of it as that happy place when I go to mentally. Funny enough, where we reside now in Massachusetts, there are some very striking similarities between the cities of Worcester, and Wichita, for a variety of reasons. We're our hometowns for many years.
So he and I met in Worcester, and I'm originally from there. And I didn't necessarily live in the best neighborhood of Worcester, so it's not the greatest representation of the city. I will say this for the city, and what I love about it the most is that there's a lot of authenticity in the creative scenes. And I love the fact that there are 7 hills as there are in the Revelation 17 connotations. I'm just kidding. No. Okay, no, I'll be for real. I know
Stay on target. Stay on target.
Well,
Calling in for a 709.
There are a lot of reputable colleges in Worcester County. There is a well-nurtured art scene. It earned its reputation as Wormtown because it supported so many underground musicians. And Worcester's surrounded by nature. And Purgatory Chasm is probably my best example of that. Caverns and old trees and hills. And it was actually created during the glacial period and totally worth checking into. What I notice about Worcester is that if you go to a grocery store, you'll see a different ethnicity in almost every aisle. And I know that's the case for a lot of downtowns, and I know that there are a lot of races in every city. But I also notice in places like Tampa, so on and so forth, that they were more segregated.
Where I grew up, there was a majority of, I guess I'll say, Caucasians, but the city itself was diverse in that there was a lot of different ethnicities as well, but I will concede that not to the degree of Worcester or the East Coast. But if you're not from there, of course, the first thing that most people will reference it by is the redundant yellow brick road and tornadoes and being flat as a pancake. However, there is a lot of beauty there as well. And of course, that probably comes from personal bias and knowing where to look. It is a different type of aesthetic. It is a different vibe, a different feel altogether. And that said, growing up there, I couldn't wait to leave. And the first chance I could, I did. And actually, the first place outside of the Midwest that I moved to was Worcester. And my experience was not very pleasant at all. I did not enjoy it. I lived in that wonderful part of town that she grew up in.
He lived on the outskirts of the thickness that was a really bad
Didn't
neighborhood.
seem like the outskirts.
It still was. To those who are familiar with Worcester, that would be around Highland Street. And at the part of Highland Street where it starts to get eerily close to my neighborhood, and that would be King Street, which has a nice reputation in that city. And during the time he was there, he had his car and apartment robbed.
And I did get to experience the upstairs neighbor setting fire to his car to elicit an insurance scam to replace God knows what. That was
And I had my car stolen that year. I made the mistake of leaving my car alone for less than 5 minutes and came out to a parking spot that was surrounded by snow, but a nice little square where my car once was. It was first thing in the morning. I was warming up my car. I go inside to grab a coffee so I can enjoy a nice hot coffee on a 7 o'clock in the morning, which was my nighttime, enjoying a coffee before bed and driving home. Only my car wasn't there. So that is not the neighborhood.
lock your doors in your car if planning on visiting and staying at that part of the city.
But the whole city isn't like that, and that's the part that needs to be stressed. There's a lot more going on for it in the music scene and the art scene and nature and history, albeit some pretty dark and insane asylum history that seems to precipitate some of that crazy behavior we're discussing. And then there's, a dark history regarding the Nipmuc tribe and the settlers.
I was going to say the same thing about the area of the Midwest that I grew up in. It has a very deep-rooted Native American history, as well as the wonderful colonization of the area by our ever-expanding westward, imperial-minded settlers. I want what you have.
Yeah, just a good old-fashioned colonization.
But anyway.
Yeah, so that happened on both ends, and the history is very sad. One of the most beautiful rivers that I visited, albeit polluted by some of the locals, which broke my heart a little bit, was in Wichita, where there was this really tall and beautiful Native American statue to honor them. And my dear beloved gave me a tour of that area, which was so nice.
Keeper of the Plains, as it is referred to. And I did get some nice tourist views of Worcester 20-odd years ago. My beautiful beloved here as well. And yet it still wasn't enough to sell me on it. Nor were my comrades and friends that were from the area as well. It just did not resonate with me whatsoever. And I never quite honestly thought that I would ever live in this region again.
Well, he was unfortunately circumferenced by a lot of negative circumstances that have less to do with Massachusetts and more to do with a very precise dynamic that does not make up the majority, but instead the minority of this state.
Not to say that the good people that I am still friends with today were not a highlight and bonus side effect of that.
Save for bouncing between Miami, Maine, and Worcester. I had been in Worcester for roughly 15 years before moving to Tampa, and then a year and a half, roughly 2 years later, meeting him in my late teens when I very first got back up there. But I ended up back in the same shit neighborhood, and he ended up in that same neighborhood, just closer to the safety zone than I was.
Not by much.
Suffice it to say, I love the fact that Worcester is kind of like the black sheep of the state. I like that there are so many insane locals that allow for the city to breathe a little bit more from the uppityness of some of the places that I've lived before. It offers so many multifaceted cultures as far as the food goes and the neighbors are concerned, and that I got the chance to make Vietnamese, Japanese, Haitian, Jamaican, St. Lucilian, Irish, Italian friends, which is awesome, and I love them all so much. And well, for the most of us have moved out to really nice neighborhoods, and they're in Worcester County, but they're not necessarily in the urban inner city part of Worcester, and they're all beautiful. I mean, I have some friends, I have 4 or 5 that still live in the same neighborhood that we grew up in.
To be back here full circle over 2 decades later is surreal, but I'll come back to that at the end here.
We have come to experience each other's side of town well enough to know that these two cities have an awful lot in common with each other.
They aesthetically have a lot of similarities with rivers, bodies of water, hillside neighborhoods, universities, and architecture, even especially in the chapels and cathedrals. Oddly enough, or funny enough, thinking things were old and historical, built in the 1800s in the Midwest, certainly does get put into perspective when you see the history of the landscape and landmarks here, that some are 17th century. And I do really admire that a lot. Something about it really speaks to my soul.
I feel exactly the same way about the history. And him and I live not too far from a place that reenacts the 17th century every day. And it's its own world we can visit at our leisure. Anytime we want to just jump into that century, we can go there and quite literally jump into how they lived, to the degree that we can watch blacksmiths and food and drink prepared as they were in that time.
I would like to correct myself. It was 19th century in the Midwest. That seemed to be old, not 18th, because a lot of things were only established around the Civil War. And I did attend the University of, I did attend Kansas State University in Manhattan. And technically, that was the first place that I did move to. And that was my first introduction to the heartbeat and soul of that entire region. Anything up around the Kansas City area is just remarkable. And in particular, Lawrence. I will come back to this at a later point, but I did move to Denver for my very first time, and then from Worcester to Denver for a couple of months, and then I moved to Lawrence. And Lawrence is, we refer to it as the Shire, as it is lush, it is green, it is vibrant, and practically unlike anything else in the area. The culture, it is a very cultured area, very, very ingrained with a thriving music scene and art scene since, I would say even the 50s. It was the home of William S. Burroughs, and many underground poets, artists, and musicians would travel to Lawrence either on tour or for a getaway, as they just found it inspiring. And it does help that the University of Kansas is there, but when you live there not as a young student, you almost come to think of that whole campus and the associated population as its own city, because it's kind of separate from those that actually live there. And it is truly an amazing place, and it still is to this day. And the people there are fantastic. They're very intellectual, very liberal, very independent, very free-thinking. And it's actually quite world-renowned for that.
It quite often happens where when he describes Lawrence, I think of, instead of a city, the entire state of Massachusetts from wall to wall. And especially when he describes the green and lush part, because and that's something I took advantage of, or I didn't really fully come to appreciate until I moved to Tampa. So when I left Worcester, it was a few months from turning 15, and Worcester, where I lived, it was we had a very great sense of community that I didn't realize we had until I left, because I became so homesick for that sense of community that it was almost sickening 6 months in. But when I first got to Tampa, I thought it was a reprieve from my city because I wanted to get out so bad. I felt like I was locked in a cold, bitter, dark, and scary environment, because I, in many ways, was. And so, when I first arrived in Tampa, the palm trees and the humidity and the warmth and the laid-back atmosphere felt divine. I thought I was going to melt into the state when I first arrived. And the first time I saw a sunset in the Tampa Bay area, I lived in Tampa, but we'd frequent Clearwater Beach, as there's in that area no better place to watch a sunset, in my opinion. My very first time I was there, there was a reggae band playing on the beach as a Peter Pan ship sailed past the sunset, and I thought I was in a fucking dream at that time.
I would like to say that while Montana is usually referred to as Big Sky Country, Kansas itself, due to its vast openness, has also some of the most remarkable, moving, and emotionally evoking sunsets and sunrises I've ever seen, especially when you're on LSD as an adolescent.
Well, I did that at Clearwater Beach, too, to be clear. And I bounced back and forth between Tampa and Worcester because what ended up happening was, in spite of having fun at Ybor City and having a fake ID, and I suggest anybody who ever goes to Tampa at least try Ybor City once. It's like Tampa's little Las Vegas. It's a lot of fun, and there's some antiquity that Las Vegas doesn't have, but I'd say that their craziness is almost on par with one another, and the amount of things to do in Las Vegas is superior to Ybor City, but definitely not superior to Tampa as a whole. While I had a great experience at the beach and Ybor City and living in an apartment complex that had 2 swimming pools and a gym and a car wash and a nature trail and a rollerblading trail and a racquetball and handball court, I wasn't too thrilled with some of the things that I learned after staying there. After roughly 6 months, certain realities came to fruition. One of them being that I craved and missed the 4 seasons, the way that you could stay one place and everything was constantly in a state of metamorphosis around you. 2, I missed the hills so much. In fact, it was so bad that Bart and I found a hill, Anderson Park to be exact, and we decided we'd roll down it like we could in Mass and Jersey, and ended up so itchy by the bottom because it wasn't Mass or Jersey. But the wonderful moss and the whimsical trees, it's the nature aspect of Florida is gorgeous. The academic system and the politics and the segregation made it very difficult. There was a lot more racism and a lot more bigotry. Florida was very divided. They weren't integrated very well. And I didn't like that. It felt like there's too much historical and cultural friction as well as ill-informed politics that really did seem to precipitate the masses into the point where it drove me crazy. Also, there were a lot of people who were people-pleasing, two-faced, and didn't really tell you what they were thinking. They were polite, but they weren't good. Thank God I met amazing people while I was down there, but you really do have to fish for them in Florida, and the ones that I found are goddamn amazing, but I never had to fish for them up here.
We, as she has spoken, we have drawn parallels between the different places that have grown close to our heart, and Worcester, again, Worcester and Wichita do share that, as well as now at this juncture in our lives, we find that Colorado and Massachusetts share a lot, and in other ways, Kansas and Florida share a lot.
Definitely.
And after a plethora of different incidents occurring, including a house burning down in the Lawrence, Kansas City area, I moved to the Los Angeles area. And it is a lot of things, some which are seemingly commonly known by those who just read and hear about it, but other aspects as well that you just don't truly know till you become ingrained into the local population. There are aspects of Southern California that I love, but after residing there, I will say that Northern California, all the way from the Big Sur, San Francisco areas, up to Vancouver, that part of the West Coast is far superior to Southern California, in my personal opinion and experience. For one thing, the people in general, you just did not know if anything coming out of anybody's mouth was legitimate.
Oh, God.
Or if they truly meant what they said, or if it was just what you wanted to hear. That's not true for everybody. And the few people that I did become close with were the exceptions to the rule, of course. But in general, a city that is built upon the entertainment industry around that as its main source of income, you can only come to expect so much.
I haven't spent a lot of time in Southern California to really add too much, but I've had friends from the East Coast that have gone west for like 2 to 6 years. I don't know any that lasted longer than 6 years, and they've come back so full of shit I almost didn't recognize them. And one of them left and came back an anthropologist, and I'm not going to use any names, but because of that experience, I must concur that is something I have experienced by omission.
That all being said, there are some amazing things that I did and would still like about the area. Culinary aspect is phenomenal. There are so many good restaurants, good diverse ethnicities in food and tastes, and very well done. I could eat completely different things each day of the week for weeks on end. That is always something I will reflect kindly upon, as is the case out here too.
I was going to say that Massachusetts is exactly that diverse, and Boston particularly, but Worcester has so many as well. Well, they're sprinkled throughout this entire state. But yes, the culinary here and Tampa has an amazing variety too.
And as is also the case with Florida and Gulf Coast states, it is rather surreal to come from areas that you experience 4 seasons and 4 distinctly different temperatures and changes in the colors and the environment, and then going to a place that stays relatively the same all year round. And the Christmas season in particular was I always found to be somewhat odd, with all the decorations and Christmas lights and things of that nature, and it's 80 degrees out.
Yes. Southern California and Florida had that in common, and him and I were really good friends during some of this time. So, and that's what's really interesting. And I think that I should just give a brief synopsis as it pertains to this. So, I lived in Worcester, he lived in Worcester. He lived in Wichita. I spent a few months in total out in Wichita. He visited Florida on many occasions, and I visit Colorado on many occasions. And while he was in Los Angeles, I was in New York. So we've also lived in Connecticut and where we live together now in Massachusetts. And I think the one thing is that in Kansas, he lived in Lawrence and Wichita and Kansas City. And when I lived in Florida, I lived on Hudson Beach, Palm Harbor, and Tampa. So there's that too. Like, there are different sections. And luckily for me, the places that I enjoy in Florida are all attached. So St. Pete, Tampa, Clearwater, and Hudson, they're all within the same area, an hour drive.
Funny side note, the distances between cities in the West, generally anything west of New England, or probably even south, you get used to, say, an average of 3 hours being nothing. It's like, oh, we're driving here, and then it'd be a 3-hour drive. All right, cool, no big deal. But out here, God forbid something is an hour away, and you're definitely not getting there by any straight shot.
So we're a little extra out here. We're a little bit spoiled, and that is because we're spoiled with nature, first of all. Let's get started with that part. We have ponds and lakes and rivers in every single town, more than one in most towns from west to east. And then we have an ocean. We have the Atlantic Ocean at our disposal, and we have some islands out in the Atlantic Ocean, which means we get the same sunsets as western states. Then, on top of it, especially if you're from Central Mass, you have the ability to be in Hartford, Providence, Boston, and Nashua within an hour. So for us, we can get to all of these things within an hour, and we have all this nature between ourselves and these things. It's green, and it's lush, and it's colorful, and it's hilly, and there's some mountain ranges, a coastline. And yes,
Thank you
and
for
yes,
visiting the
and
Massachusetts
yes,
Board of Tourism.
the furthest we have to go is really New York City, and that's only 2.5 hours away. So yeah, it takes we get a little spoiled.
And it is a nice little commodity to be able to drive through 3 states in less than 3 hours.
And have all that nature between them all.
'Tis true, but there is nature as well. And some of the other longer drives out west, unless you are driving from Denver to Kansas City or Wichita, in which case you're driving through one large field 9 hours wide. But once you get to your destinations, yes, things do change.
It is so green up here that even the cities spout grass between the cracks of the pavement.
And on another note of living in Southern California, the Los Angeles area, West Hollywood in particular, as well as Los Feliz, Echo Park, and even the Valley, it is beautiful. And the aspect of it being the same climate and temperature year-round does yield itself beautiful results of birds chirping every morning, beautiful sky, beautiful orange trees, you name it. And the ocean. Venice Beach, Malibu, Big Sur are amazing. And I would highly suggest to anybody taking a drive up to PCH Highway 1. It is beautiful and an amazing journey to be had. Plus, great UFO viewing off the coast of Catalina Island as well.
Yeah.
That area, it's beautiful. It's pretty. It was definitely an experience. I would suggest a place to visit at some point. but the touristy side of things out there, Los Angeles and Hollywood especially, don't yield too much. You definitely would want to, hopefully, if possible, know somebody that lives there, is from there, that could show you around, and then get the fuck out and go north.
It's amazing how many similarities Southern California has with Florida, because I concur on so many levels, from the water to the sunset to I have a better vacation than staycation vibe when I go. And I love my Tampa family so much. I can't even begin to say how many people I've come to love and respect that live in that area. But that said, and I miss them. We actually just came back from visiting them, and he fell in love with them in the short period of time that he...
Absolutely. Amazing people, of course, already. There wouldn't be anything different to be expected.
And I felt the same way about the people that I met through him in Kansas as well. So I would say Florida is a good derivative of Southern California and Kansas. There's a lot of similar politics with Kansas, and there's a lot of similarities regarding the nature in California. And before I pop off into New York, I just wanted to say a couple of nice things about Florida. Clearwater Beach, to get back into it, the sand is so brilliant, and the restaurants are great. The nighttime vibe is so clean and well lit, and there's so much to be done on that strip, and there's something for all parts of your palate. I lived in Palm Harbor. I moved from Hudson Beach to Palm Harbor, and they're both great in their own ways, in that they were both very close to the Gulf of Mexico. One was directly on the water, and the other was one rollerblade path away from it. And yes, I had the rollerblades, and yes, I would go all the time. And there was a monkey sanctuary on that rollerblading trail.
I believe you.
I would take my friends down that trail, and I would wave to the monkeys, and the monkeys would... I would wave to the monkeys and then tell my friends to look into the bushes, and the monkeys would throw shit at them sometimes. It was so funny. It was like I had a little deal with the monkeys almost. I'm like, I got some people for you.
Now, if you look to your right and check out these bushes...
Look, I'm like, there's monkeys between those.
Splat.
But Bart used to do it with me. So anyway, I ended up in Saratoga Springs, New York, which was absolutely gorgeous. I can't say one negative thing about it. I owned a house, and I had a beautiful haunted Italianate Victorian mansion that was far too big for 3 people, but I was a little extra and wanted it anyway. And it was right on 87. 87 runs into Albany, and you can take Albany straight to Massachusetts, so it had that advantage. It was only 2.5 hours. Saratoga Springs and Wilton were on exit 15. Albany was on exit 2, and between exit 16, where I resided, and exit 21, there was an indoor water park and a ski resort. But by the time you got to the end, where you hit 21, you would be at Lake George. If you keep going north, you'll end up in Canada, which is also great. I'm gonna scratch my head. Oh, yeah. And that was amazing. The sun would set in the Adirondack, and you could see its reflection on the water, which was gorgeous. And it was very clean. There were gambling boats like the Minnehaha that would take you into Canada, and during the winter, the ice would freeze, and they'd have a winter fest. And Saratoga Springs has a plethora of museums, and the beauty of that town is outstanding because a lot of rich people own it. and pay a lot of taxes to live there. So there are hot springs, natural hot springs, and there's actually a mountain trail called Saratoga Mountain where there's biking and walking trails that also have beautiful views. So it's endlessly beautiful as far as the nature is concerned out there, and all the amenities you could ever want were at your disposal, which was really nice. And virtually no crime. It was just pristine. And I can't complain about a single thing out there.
For me, the most majestic, beautiful, and everlasting natural beauty of any place I've ever lived has been Colorado. And there is something about it that leaves a lasting impression. The Rocky Mountains themselves are unparalleled anywhere else, in my opinion, in North America. And having that in your backyard reminds you every day that you wake up and you see it, how amazing it is to be breathing the air, being underneath the blue sky, and just being grateful for living. It's a great reminder of that and how small we really are.
I agree. Colorado does leave a lasting impression. The times that I've gone, I've grown fond of Colorado Springs and certain parts of Denver and the outskirts of Denver. And 2 hours out is as far as I've driven as far as Colorado goes. So I know there's a lot of uncharted territory for me in that regard. That said, I find those things that he just described in every moment. Pretty much everywhere except Connecticut has given me that reminder of how small we are, because you leave a piece of yourself everywhere you go and you grab a piece of everywhere you go on this journey, and not one place has played less of a role than the other. And I don't want to discuss Connecticut very much. I'll say this, and I want to be nice and concise even though I spent 10 long years there, that it has all the beauty of New England, but I spent enough time in its political structure and amidst the locals in ways that really do give you a vibe of its people. And I was desperate to get back to any state that I'd lived in previous to it as a result of that fact. So beautiful, yes. It is my least favorite place, my least favorite of them all.
My time in Connecticut was very short, and the people that I did meet were wonderful human beings. But in general, it's a state that I would continue driving through on the interstate and not stop at if possible.
And for the same reason you've described it as that.
That's right. If there was ever a very high-priced loaf of white bread laying on the counter, it would be in the shape of Connecticut.
Oh my God, that's perfect. Only that bread's gonna talk shit about you and pull you over for having nice plates.
Peanut butter and jealous.
You guys want an idea? Go watch Stepford Wives. I think that summarizes it.
For Connecticut, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did want to finish saying about Colorado that there are 3 distinctly different areas of that state. There's the Front Range, which practically from the eastern city limit of Denver stretches all the way to Kansas City. That's where that 9-hour field begins. And there's the high country, which is the mountain range. And then there's the western slope, which is far more desert-like terrain and more sparsely populated and actually far more conservative. And it is the one area of the state that gives the rest of it a bad name, thanks to such wonderful politicians such as Lauren Boebert, who are just an embarrassment. But anyway, the Denver area, there's nothing I can really say negatively about it. Again, liberal arts and music scene and the culture itself is so rich and historical, as is Kansas City, actually. The jazz scene there in the 20s and through the 40s was very prolific and well-known as well, as was the mafia. But anyway, Denver has everything, and it has continued to grow. It's got a thriving technology. Tech companies have have really put a lot of money into the community and the city as a whole, as well as an outfit called Meow Wolf, based out of Santa Fe, also in Las Vegas. They chose Denver as another hub several years ago and invested several $1,000,000 into the art and music scene, giving it a really good boost. And you have Red Rocks, which
That looks so amazing.
if you ever have a chance to see a live performance of any sort at Red Rocks, there is nothing else like it on the planet, I assure you. It is a natural amphitheater carved out of stone on the side of the mountain overlooking the Denver area. Absolutely beautiful. And of course, there's the now infamous U2 album and concert footage from that put it kind of on the map, as well as several others. But seeing a concert there is just unrivaled. I've seen everybody from Nine Inch Nails to Muse, the Black Crowes, you name it. And just being out under the stars while you're watching a live act with these giant rocks and boulders shooting up on each side, it's just amazing.
I've watched videos that you sent me while you were there, and they were incredible.
There's nothing else like it. I know that.
Even our counselor went there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Our very own shrink.
It's amazing, and again, a great UFO hotspot.
We have to conclude this really soon, but I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to do more honed-in versions of this, whereby we go to Sturbridge Village, for instance, and then we record what it was like after. In fact, this inspires me, and I want to note it, that we should do one about visiting Tampa recently, together.
Yeah, agreed. And any place we do that with.
Henceforth.
I would like to conclude by saying these are the places that we have spent the most amount of time in, that we have resided in. We did not go off into the places we have traveled to and visited, because those places are also numerous. All over Europe for me, the Caribbean for her, Canada and Mexico.
It's endless.
It's endless. And all the other places in the United States itself. That is a whole nother list.
I want to make Hawaii a priority eventually. I need to see those volcanoes, and there's a calling for it. Ireland and Hawaii are two that are on my imminent bucket list.
And I agree.
So him and I are going to have to do those ones together.
And that's all, folks.